Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here. Excuse me for my raspy voice. I appear to be losing it just as we're about to go into 2025. And I figured we're going to start 2025 with a fun video. Something I've never done. I've probably talked about things like this in like State of the Realm or like on stream or whatever. But I'm going to make a video comparing strats for the current chaotic raid. There's a bit of discourse. There's two main strats. Technically, there's more, but I'll brief mention of those. We don't need to get too much into it. But there's what is being called as Raidplan or Aurelia, which, funnily enough, as we'll talk about in this video, might just need to be called Aurelia because the Raidplan is not working for me anymore. The images in the back won't load. And there's CODCAR, which is actually very similar to the strat that my group cleared with, or not even cleared with, that we refined after we cleared. It's put together by a number of people, and the logic behind both of them actually has different pros and cons. And some people like one and some people like the other. So we're going to look at the pros and cons of both of them. And at the end of this video, I'm going to tell you what the main problem is with the strats in general, because there's actually like an overarching problem between both of them that's shared. And some of you might figure out what that is. If you've been playing for a long time, you probably know what it is already. But those of you who might be newer, this might be like the first time you're hopping in. There might be like one element about both that you're not considering when trying to choose which one to do. So I was originally going to pull up the raid plan itself for a raid plan, because that's what it's called. However, like I said, I've tried several different make a copies, and apparently when I click make a copy, the background image has not been loading. This actually happened in my own guide video too. I posted a Discord image, and I guess Discord has changed the way that they save images. So what's happened is the raid plan itself no longer has the arena on it. So while you can, if you know the fight, you know the arena, you can technically divine all these positions. I guess I can't use it for this video. Wish I'd done this a day earlier. Fortunately, raidbin.com/COD has just kind of like an infographic on everything. The different assignments for Alliance A and C, Bramble movement stuff. So I'm going to use this instead. And I'll be honest, I quite frankly don't like either raid plan or PowerPoint. First con for both of them. And this is a fight where having a reference sheet, a cheat sheet, is, I think, invaluable, especially given that you may know the fight, but you might get a different assignment to a different alliance in any given party finder. So being able to quickly look at, okay, that's the spot. To me, that's just a better format in general. And this is closer to that, so I actually kind of prefer this layout more. I believe CODCAR added a cheat sheet to the first slide as well. So I think that's the first improvement. Make sure you have cheat sheets available for stuff like this. There's just in the future, chaotic assignments, there's too many of them to have to scroll through every single thing and see where you belong for every mechanic, versus just being able to go, okay, insert. And then you can even just call out. It's actually very similar to the way that JP uses macros. They effectively do a cheat sheet in text form, and everyone just calls a spot instead of like doing the whole marker dance and everything. So that's number one. Con for both, I think, for me, was the layout, but still good for learning the fight, just not good for referencing back. Make sure there's cheat sheets in the future. So now we're going to go mechanic by mechanic, specifically in phase 2, for how you want to do either raid plan or CODCAR. The reason we're not doing phase 1, other than Alliance A, B, and C being left, right, and center or left, center, right in retrospective or in respective order, for like the wild charges or, just giving people information, the positioning is not really the thing that needs to be talked about there. Everyone just understands that phase 1, the mistakes come from people forgetting which hand they have, not paying attention to the arrow or death cast, or getting lost because they don't remember what alliance they're in, and flare. The issues have nothing to do with either the raid plan or CODCAR. It's just not a phase that really has a strategy. It is just tracking a whole bunch of debuffs and things on the boss. So we're going to jump right into what I think is the main problem phase for the entire fight. And that is the second Deluge of Darkness, where the arena splits between the PvP tiles and the outside platforms. So we're going to go mechanic by mechanic and talk about the pros and cons of each of them. First, we have raid plans strategy here. So this is what the layout looks like. True north, mind you. So each of these Stygians on the side platforms, the tank will face them north, and then you will do these arrangements. So you can see that Alliance A, which will have the ring to the left side of the boss, the outside ring. That's another thing. I kind of wish they had the outside ring here. That's not, I don't really consider it a con because I understand the fight. But like effectively just having the ring as like a reference point visually to me. If the arena loaded like it does on Raidplan, wouldn't be a problem. That's actually just something with Raid Bin. So we'll move past that. So it has, for the spreads during the first third Art of Darkness, it has main tank north, supports north and south, very normal. And then 4 DPS on the side, you know, M1, R1 top left and R2, M2 bottom left. And then when you look at Alliance B, it's the opposite because they need to be aiming away from the center of the room. And that's really the chief thing here, is that all of the spread beams are being aimed away from the center of the room. So, pro of this is that you effectively know you're always lining up along the outside ring. So even though you are facing the boss north, the outside ring becomes your reference point to such a degree that it's pretty easy to find your spot here. It's pretty easy to remember your spot for something like this. Of course, it fulfills the condition of needing to aim everything away. So in terms of just performing the mechanic correctly, there's technically not an issue. And I'd also like to point out that Raid Bin actually visually covers a problem that I have with putting everyone on the same side in creating that red ring for melee range. My chief concern with this is players standing too close. These things aren't super wide, the spreads, but they're not narrow either. So it's very easy for a player to just be too far forward and get clipped by 2. The Raid Bin is doing its due diligence here by making sure people understand they need to be outside of that max melee range if they want to be completely safe from this. So that's a con to me for this, but as long as you understand that, not a problem. And then the pairs, really, realistically, no problem with the pair itself, but I'll get into something I'm not a fan of about that either. There's actually a couple of things about the pairs I'm not a fan of. One of them I only realized just before recording this video. And then the towers or whatever. The tower assignments are, one group is north clockwise, one group is south clockwise, and you just go. For Raid Bin in particular, again, this doesn't happen in the Raid Plan. The Raid Plan is perfectly fine for the way it was organized. I don't like the way this is visually shown. It makes it look like Alliance A is always doing north-south and Alliance C is always doing east-west. That can be remedied super easily. And as soon if you've done the fight even a single time, you understand that's not how it works. So it's not really a con, but it's just the presentation of it I'm not a fan of. And then Alliance B is just the same, but everyone's on the other side. So, number one thing that, first thing that I find is a con for this. I already mentioned the all on one side, me being afraid of the lasers. Another thing I have a problem with is the potential for effectively putting, I'll say 4 players, not 6, at a major potential problem point when it comes to the boss doing cleaves. So, you're effectively putting all 6 people on the same side of the boss, but 2 people only have to take a step over to get out. If the boss does the cleave on the respective side of the room right after the spread, and especially if there was not a lot of mitigation for the spread or people didn't get healed, but like the moment the spread hit, there's a good chance it just hits somebody as they're moving through the boss to the other side. That's a matter of individual responsibility. I don't really knock it too much, but it does create a potential point where I would be concerned. Just thinking about the average party finder, like I can say, oh, if people do it right, then it's not a problem, but I have to consider the likelihood of a mistake happening. And this creates that scenario where more people are innately at risk of certain patterns from the boss. And like I said, this is pros and cons. So we'll talk about the CODCAR has other issues with this exact same mechanic. Then we come to the pairs. So technically R2 has to run far. Honestly, not a con. Like it looks like it here, but it's such a short run for R2 because you're so close to the boss that I don't consider the person furthest east-west having to run extra really much of a con. It is more of a distance to run than CODCAR for that person, so I would be a little safe. I would still make sure you have MIT. Make sure that there's maybe a heal right after the pair lands, especially if the pair is the second hit that lands and not the third. But that's not even it. I actually have a chief concern with the healer being the person doing the bait for this mechanic. Now, I hadn't really thought about this before because I started thinking about it in just successful terms. Yeah, of course, the main tank and healer, this is their static position. Of course, they should be baiting. And I think that's the reason for it here. That being said, if a bait goes wrong, like let's say the melee is, somehow too far away. They're not that big, but they're not that small either. So the other melee would really have to have screwed the healer in the first place here. The healer eating it alone is not ideal. If I'm the healer here, I'm probably super mitting myself. Like if I'm a sage, I'm probably going to Toracole myself, give myself personally a Zoid shield or a Crassus shield or something like that. Because you can survive them alone. They do like 200,000 damage and you have like 130,000. So even the tank throwing, like if I were, I would recommend the tank throwing spot mitt on a healer on the platforms no matter what. Just because it's safer. Like you want the healer to live no matter what. You want your rezzers to live no matter what. So even that's a problem I have. But again, it's not really a major problem. So the pros are it's really easy to remember that you're lined up along the ring. The assignments here are all pretty simple. Even like you're spread on the left and right side, you're the north clockwise tower. Like if you're the 3 northmost players, you know you're the north clockwise tower. If you're the 3 southmost players, you're the south clockwise tower. There's a lot of easy communication between all of that, and it will come down to execution and remembering your spot more than anything. That's going to be a common trend. So I think that pretty adequately covers the pros and cons. The cons, of course, being you're at a higher risk for the cleave, and the healer is at an increased risk by being the... I think that there is the risk of orienting to north, but this is a post swap problem. I don't think people are going to have an issue orienting to north on the first set of Third Art of Darkness. It's the second set. I have seen people face the boss south, but I'm going to be honest. If everybody thinks it's north and the boss is facing south, then it doesn't matter because you're just, if you're like, oh, the tank, like it depends. Is if people know it's north, but they see the boss facing south, are they going to try to do it true north, or are they going to look at the tank and go, well, I guess I'll just do it based on the way the boss is facing right now? Which then just means that, like, for example, if Alliance C was flipped around, they would be doing Alliance A's assignments, which are still effectively the same thing. So again, minor issue. I don't really knock any points. I will say there is also, I think, I'd have to double check the AoE ranges. One other potential advantage of this. One thing with CODCAR is when the boss is facing, the Stygians are facing directly out. Third Art of Darkness's cleave can hit the inside tiles. The inside tile people are not immune to the things that are happening on the outside. If you are a player who is flush east or west in a tower, on a tile doing a tower, you effectively need to get as far away from the east and west platform as possible. And I'll be frank, most people aren't even thinking about that. Most people just take the hit and go, what happened? Or they don't even really think about it or register it in the first place. I think by facing the boss north, I don't think the cleave reaches like to the side as far as it reaches front and back. But I don't have the AoE size like as a reference. So that's a maybe. I think that might be kind of like an unintended advantage of this positioning in the first place. So you can see already a lot of pros and cons to just this first thing. So now we're going to go over to CODCAR, which is again the strat that I largely worked with. There's one difference here that our chief strategy person changed when it was provided to CODCAR, but we never did it that way, and that'll be funny when I get to it later. So the layout here is actually going to be, I guess, something I probably should have considered, but it wasn't actually something I could mention. Raidplan shows it, so maybe I should go back to Raidplan, because before we even get into showing the positioning, I probably should talk about a chief issue I have. So pretend there's an arena here that you can actually see. And you'll notice that the R1 and R2 DPS are all the way south. So those are B's ranged DPS. Alliance B's healer, melee, and tanks are all on the north side of the tiles. Alliance A has 6 players on the west tile. Alliance C has 6 players on the east tile. And then a healer and a tank from A and C both take the other 2 south tiles. So what this actually part also has advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that the alliances in general are closer to each other for raid buffs. That is the chief reason that this was made. And while that is one potential advantage, it's not an entire advantage. So if those ranged are buffered jobs, they are out of range of B. So your comp suddenly becomes kind of a big determining factor. Like if R1 and R2 are a machinist and a black mage, you don't want them out of range because whatever, they're selfish jobs. But I mean, if it's a machinist, are you really even thinking about that? Sorry. But then if they're like Picto Dancer, now it's actually kind of annoying. So you haven't really solved the raid buff problem. You've just created a different problem. So I don't even consider it a pro or a con. I think it's an overvalued aspect of this positioning. And this positioning will come with a major con when we get to Looming Chaos. Probably one of the biggest cons that you could possibly have. In a fight where the damage check is only a problem if people are screwing up with or without having more raid buff alignment. And again, this will come back quite a few times because this range south thing and this exact positioning, again, it comes with a lot of caveats for the second half of the phase that on paper don't look like they matter right from the get-go. So by going to CODCAR, before we even get to the thing that I wanted to talk about, we have to talk about the top right up here. So this is the default positioning. This puts tank, healer, and melee DPS from Alliance A and one of their range DPS on opposite platforms. And then Alliance B has their 6 on the west. C has their 6 on the right for the tiles. And then there's 2 ranged DPS on the outer platforms from B and C. So the reason for this is almost entirely because of what will happen during Looming Chaos. It does come with some other advantages that we'll talk about later, but the immediate thing you'll notice is Alliance A is split. So Alliance A will only ever be operating effectively in a light party. They will only be in range of the 4 of each, like the 4 of each other for the first half of this phase. You're solo healing. Again, you're basically treating it like a dungeon at that point. And Alliance B should be in range of their own healers. They should be in range of their own buffs. Alliance B should be able to somewhat manage. The B melees might end up out of range of each other. So that's a potential concern. So it basically throws the idea of raid buff alignment not entirely out of the window, but it makes it not a factor. Again, in a fight where killing the fight faster is not as big of a deal as staying alive. Staying alive and just constantly hitting the boss will do enough. So that's one of the most major pros cons comparisons that you'll see people discussing between the two, is how not efficient raid buffs are. This is definitely meant to be more safe and healer efficient than anything else. And I know some of you will want to talk about healer out. We'll mention that at the end of the video. So now let's actually get into the mechanic that I talked about initially, because again, I forgot Raidplan doesn't actually have the initial assignments until I think you scroll down past the Stygians and it has all the initial assignments, but I just started at the top of the phase. So the way that CODCAR does this, and I will move this over, don't worry. The way CODCAR does it is instead of sticking 6 people on one side and orienting the boss north, they instead orient the boss towards the outer ring, because no matter whether you never need to consider the arena's orientation at all, which way is north, which way is south. Again, I didn't really knock that too bad, because in Raidplan, even if the boss is face south, as long as everyone orients around the boss and not the outer ring, it can solve itself for the most part. For this one though, it's completely it faces towards the outside, and you have the assignments that you see here. You effectively have all 3 of Alliance A's outermost players handling the 3 spreads closest to the wall, and the 3 players that are ranged are all handling the ones closest to the inner side. We do a 5-1 looking split here. The reason for that being, again, we just figured it was safer to spread 5 players at cardinal and intercardinal positions instead of squeezing 6 players all into that one side. That was the logic there. And then the one person going through the middle, if anyone's there, they've made a mistake, because there's no reason that a player should be directly through the center of the room. So it just creates a much safer space. In terms of the pairs, it supports together. I'll say the 2 guest characters are together. The northmost guest character in range, that's not that important, but that's a quick way to do it. And the southmost guest character is just outside of range. And then the melee in range from Alliance A are the other ones. So the A melee shifts down and joins that person. And then I guess technically, yeah, the eastmost DPS would shift down and take that melee spot as well. So they would just do the same movement that the melee's doing, and then the tank moves forward and the healer out. This creates a couple of advantages on its own. One, the healer is not baiting. In fact, the tank can just solo tank it with cooldowns. I don't recommend doing that. But if the healer's out of range of the tank, that person's not dead. And the healer will not die as a result. And then the other 4 people just need to do it correctly. The other thing is that the other assignments don't have to move as far to switch sides. I barely consider it. I have to mention it that, if you need to swap sides post pairs, that it's safe. But the Protean, at least one person has to do a fairly large movement to do it safely. So no matter what, it's just a number of people that could be potentially at risk for that cleave. And it's why I recommend, again, Mitt or some sort of instant heal between the hits of the spreader pair and literally anything that happens afterwards. And that's going to be more important in a second. And then the towers, Alliance A's outermost players are outside of the ring clockwise, and the other three, and all three ranged, are inner tile clockwise. So again, I don't really think there's an advantage or disadvantage to these. It's more like an agreed upon thing for the towers that you're getting right here. But the honestly, it's one of those things where I see more disadvantages in terms of just raw positioning for the risk out here in terms of raid plan. I think it all makes logical sense. I just think there are one or two more potential risks that you run into that shouldn't happen if everyone's playing correctly, that end up not mattering in either strat as long as you do what this says to do. And I don't think either of them are executionally more difficult than the other. So they're pretty even in terms of what you actually achieve and what the reasoning is behind it. Now, that's in terms of positioning. But in terms of who's actually on the platform, that's where you weigh most of the things. So on the first set of towers, a con for this setup is that not everyone is in range for tank LB. Now, keep in mind, by this point in the fight, you probably only have a tank LB1, maybe a tank LB2. If you've managed to LB cheese enough from like the first phase and there weren't as many deaths, it's possible. But I wouldn't bank on it. Most people are going to have an LB1. If Alliance A needs to LB, then half of their party will miss it. Now, I'm of the opinion if that happens, that you need the LB, and it's the only way all of the team's going to survive. So you probably aren't past Tower Prog in the first place, and your fight's over before it's even begun. So I don't consider that much. And the tank LB issue will be resolved later when we talk about the positioning for post-swap. I'll also say this. I'd like to do a reminder for how the towers actually work. So if a tower is partially missed, it only hits for, I think before any mitigation or any shields, I think about 50,000. And then for every person missing in a partially missed tower, it will do one vuln stack. So if two people miss a 3-stack tower, it'll do 50,000 damage, but it will give 2 vuln stacks. If a tower is completely missed, which is the tank LB scenario, it does 200,000 damage. If your healers are not on the top of their game, and I've seen so many times people don't heal after the pairs, they don't heal after the spread, they just focus on doing the mechanics, 200,000 damage is very likely to be lethal to a handful of people no matter what. There's a good chance the inside tile people are somewhat safe, but there's a high probability someone is going to die. So in that piece of advice, regardless of which strat you're doing, do not leave a tower completely unattended unless there is no other way to resolve it. A good example would be if one person somehow dies, like let's say you're going into the phase and a corner tile person is late and they just die because they fall out of the arena before they can even get to the tile. Or let's say an accidental PvP happens when people are getting into position. Those south tiles can be kind of scary because people, melees especially, want to try to be in boss range as long as possible before tiles begins, and then they try to run back and like they clip somebody else and kill them or kill both people, whatever. If there's two people in a corner, have one person take the solo tower and one person take the 2-person tower. Don't both take the 2-person tower. You're going to end up with a better scenario in that case than if you did the opposite. Regardless of strat, that's just a general piece of advice that can help you no matter what you have decided. Because if you need the tank LB here because the tower is completely missed, the tank LB1 is likely not the thing that's going to save the run. You're probably going to have a few deaths, and as soon as you have a few deaths in this fight, in this phase, I don't need to tell you what happens. You know how bad it gets really, really fast. So they're about even in strats. It's really a matter of preference, but I'd say the strat deviance really begins after that. While it doesn't seem like it's the case, it's really from the next point onward where things actually start to get different. So we're going to go back to raid bin for this. You can see the alliance. Yeah, so here's where the alliance positions would have been for spreads and wild charge. Okay, so I did what we call the V for wild charge positions, and I am of the opinion that if you are doing this strat, and this is the strat, by the way, I've never used the line strat for the wild charge ever. I think I adjusted to do it once because I think there was like a new player who just wasn't moving, or like a tank that wasn't moving, and they were actually in the line position unintentionally. I filled in. That's the only time I think I've ever done it. If you are going to do the corner V wild charge, everybody should hug the little spire / hockey puck thing where M1 and H1 are. The tank shouldn't be forward like this. The tank being forward creates the potential that if they're a pixel too far left or right, it actually cleaves offset and maybe only hits 2 people. So if you are going to do this, the tank should also step back to stand right next to the little spire back there. I'll also say this, a downside to this that is, I'll also acknowledge was a downside to the strat that I use to do most of my clears, is if your melee is somebody that has a gap closer in their rotation, and yes, I am referring to Dragoon. I have seen a Dragoon jump here and kill the tank. That position is not safe to jump from, right next to the puck. They need to be cognizant that it's not safe and stand and not use anything that will actually gap close. Obviously, high jump doesn't actually displace you, but if any of your other jumps are available there that would displace you, I've seen it happen, but I think it was because we were recovering. I don't know what it is actually normally available there. Don't star diver, don't spine shot, don't do any of that. So that is a downside that's kind of like job specific. It's not the end of the world, but I have to mention it. And this is the strat that I used. So this is technically a con for both. CODCAR has decided to update that as well for the spreads and stacks to do what is a line strat. Effectively, the DPS and the tank line up on the cubby and the near platform, and the healer fills in between, and you actually make a direct line. So as long as there's no traffic jams, this eliminates the potential problem. The melee can now safely do something like a star diver. It is just a direct line as long as everybody is actually like, you can visually see the line. I don't think this is like clear enough that the tank is really close to that middle corner and actually creates the line. This eliminates all the problems. The only problem is any tile movement being done wrong as a PvP moment. And honestly, that shouldn't happen anyway. You should have the order in CODCAR of THD, and I believe Raidplan has the THD priority as well. Tank will always move first, healer second, DPS third. As long as every player knows that, neither should really have an issue. This does come with the advantage of the healer resetting their tile in the first half of the phase before the rotation mechanic goes out, which you should be letting the corners reset. If your corners are not resetting, that's a problem because they may need to panic reset either during the rotation or right after the rotation ends. So when the healer steps back into the cubby, the DPS can then step out, and it should be fine by any measure. And the tank is already leaning towards the other side. So if they need to go to the other side, they're going to go the other direction anyway. And if they need to do this side, then the corner reset should have already happened and they can move in. Again, it's not that big of a deal if everyone hugs the cubby. In all honesty, the biggest con between the two is the potential gap closer from the Dragoon. But everybody needs to hug the cubby. I just don't think you should have the tank all the way forward, even though that's what I progged with for a while. And technically we did adjust to that without... It's one of those things we changed without changing the diagram because you just kind of... We are experienced enough to kind of common sense that that's a problem. And the tanks individually were making sure they made the effort to fix it. But I don't know. Also, I just realized that you kind of can't see it. But now you can see the lineup. You can see the left lineup, and yeah, now you can see the whole lineup. So you can see what I mean. Everything else is not really that big of a deal. I just don't think there's a big enough difference to say one's definitively better than the other. But, you know, your Dragoons will probably appreciate actually being able to gap close, you know, if they have a Star Diver in that moment. So that's something that at the very least is worth mentioning, I think. And by the way, the spread positions, bro, I've never seen a single group ever perfectly adhere to these spread positions in any strat. Mind you, bro, when spreads come out, I'm just praying there aren't dead bodies so people get doubled up on. And by the way, during spreads, if you're a tank and there's anyone dead, please invuln. Because if you get selected twice, you have just saved probably the entire alliance. In all honesty, you have probably saved so many people. You have no control over it. But if it rolls that way, you look like the hero. And you probably want to look like the hero. If you res before spreads also, please move away from wherever you res someone. I have seen, in fact, just last night, somebody res someone right before spread. They got up and got double spreaded right on top of them. And so that's just another little tip, fair warning, irrelevant of strat. So yeah, that's a potential scary thing that can happen. Paladin with cover doesn't work precisely because if somebody gets doubled up, you can't hallowed cover to save someone, but you dying is probably better than the healer dying or a reser dying. So Paladin with cover, good just to save the resers. Just make sure that if the boss, like the Stygians, are going to go rampant, that people are ready to heal because they're going to start autoing the non-tanks if that happens. Probably better off only doing that if you're one of the inner tanks, just to make sure nothing goes wrong there. So then we get to Bramble phase. Okay, it's really hard for me to be objective because this is the second most aggravating thing about Raidplan for me. Not because of happy Brambles, by the way. There's nothing to do with that. I have fundamental issues with everything about this. I can see where the logical sense happens, and some of the things that I say are kind of in line with my own statements about why the raid buffs aren't important. So, this is the Raidplan Bramble strat, and you got to remember what the actual layouts are on each platform. So there's a tank and a healer, 2 melee DPS, 2 range DPS. I'll say it now. If you can have 3 range DPS to an alliance, please do it. Don't lock in double melee here. Fake melee is way better than... it's so much easier having more ranged in this fight. I'll just be honest. It just is. More res, potentially more resers, potentially more range that can hit from anywhere, more people that can deal with Atomos. And it makes this next part make a little bit more sense. So... the way it's done is all 4 DPS on the actual dropping of the Brambles is whatever. That's just THD movement priority and make sure you drop them. Honestly, as long as they're not super close, either to the platform or to each other, it doesn't really matter. We used to drop them on the, like, you can see my mouse cursor here. We used to drop them like here and here on day 1. And then it created this little like hole right here for Donut. And then we were like, why are we doing that? And so anywhere like forward more is better as long as they're not too close to each other actually on the east and west. So don't worry too much about being exact about this. And just as long as you don't PvP each other, that's what matters most. As for who's baiting it, the melees bait the inner Brambles and then run out with them. And the ranged bait these outer Brambles and run, you can see, opposite. So first of all, I don't like these Bramble spots, period. I think that creating that little narrow gap for the melees to run between is not a fun experience, because now your melees who want to hit something, and maybe a monk without a ranged attack, have to effectively sprint through that open section and then to their respective sides opposite of which one they were tethered to, and then they have to run back around it to even get back. You're like, this is like 6 piercing talons or something like that. You're probably not having a thrilling time as a melee DPS doing this. The range don't care. I'll be honest. The range could bait any of these. It wouldn't matter. And the melees, honestly, if I were to change anything, if you still wanted the melees to bait, I would almost just have the melees do the outer ones and do this and go to the R1 and R2 positions. They would just have to start kind of on the back. So as long as the boss is in range there and the tank and healer are like perfectly on the east side of the platform out of, range of the Brambles, I would prefer that personally. So the melee don't have to do that weird wraparound. They have to run further out, but they don't have to do the weird wraparound to get back to the boss. They can just, they just have to make it back to that outer section. I think it probably ends up going, you get 1, maybe 2 melee GCDs as you leave. You do 2 or 3 piercing talons or whatever range attack if you have one. Sorry, monks. And then you loop back around and you probably get back in. So there's probably a total of 6 GCDs that go through this entire section. And about half of them are probably ranged, realistically. I just don't think that's like, I can't really be objective. I just don't think that's a good idea. I think the logic of making all 4 melee DPS, or I'm sorry, all 4 DPS on the platform be the ones responsible makes sense logically. You have one role that has exactly 4 people on the East and West platform. And so why would they not handle the mechanic that requires 4 people, right? That makes complete logical sense. But there's no healing that's needed here. It's just auto attacks. And there's an interrupt that's needed as well, but the tank can take care of that. So it's like DPS doesn't really matter in this fight if everyone's doing it correctly. But fundamentally making the melee do this, I just don't agree with. I just fundamentally don't agree with doing that. So for me, that's a major con of the Bramble strat. Going over to the COD strat, you have 3 ranged and a healer all on the platform. So this is, again, where the platform assignments matter. You have 3 ranged DPS, a melee DPS, a tank, and a healer. You have 4 ranged jobs that can all do it. And while, yes, there are going to be ranged jobs that also don't want to do it. I mean, that's the case in the other strat, too. If you have 2 ranged, they're both doing it. They both have to move. They are the ranged jobs. They have things in their kits that can keep them doing their mostly normal damage while doing this. Picto hammers or Black Mage triple casts, or you're just a bard or a fizz range in general. And a healer, like, yeah, you can have some instant cast here. And especially because this is during a 1-minute buff window. When I think of jobs that want to utilize a 1-minute buff window, I think of jobs like Dragoon. I think of jobs like Ninja who want to be in this range. You could also technically pot this. Most people don't pop their 5-minute, it's something raiders do, but it's not often something you'll see here. I just think of letting the melee payphone in the middle is just more logical. Also, the Brambles actually being along the outside of the ring, as you can see here, this is what our Bramble positions actually look like with the Brambles along the east or west wall. While you now have 2 narrow sections, you don't have to run around them at all. The ranged effectively the ranged and the healers that are on those outer ones just stand out and just run out. And the ranged that are on the inner ones cross over and go over. And there's plenty of space. These lines on the ground are also there as references of where you're going to be dropping these. There are lines on the ground in the arena itself as well. And that's where you generally want them, is effectively, they want 2 of these little like boxes between the 2 Brambles. There is also a corridor for technically gap closing back to the boss. I'm not going to lie. I would be horrified if I was a melee trying to line up the Stygian to gap close at any point. It is, you are ready to be a YouTube clip. Like you are going to be on Twitter. Like at some point you're going to make the mistake and you're going to be on Twitter. It's going to be your clip. So I'm not going to say to do that, but that is a potential here. So for me, there's all upside in this Bramble strat. And in fact, even if the other strat swapped to this Bramble position, I think it would be overall better for the melees that are baiting the inside. Because then, again, they don't have to do that weird runaround. They can get to their snap point a little bit quicker. And like we said, they could also technically, if they're brave enough, gap close. I'm not recommending it. Please live. That's all I want you to do. And that's the recurring theme of everything that's happening here. So for me, that's going to be a CODCAR win, just unanimously. And then after that, there's not really much. Like, what am I going to say about the rotations? What am I going to say about that? Like, the things I listed for Wild Charge are realistically the only things I have to say about rotation, is that you get the healer to automatically do a tile swap. And that's all I have to say about rotation. Again, as a reminder, this forces the healer to do a tile swap, and then the melee DPS can do the tile swap. And then you don't have to worry about it through the entire rotation mechanic. So that's a thing. Now, we get to Looming Chaos. And Looming Chaos is, for me, where, again, I lose the ability to be a bit objective. Because Looming Chaos Raidplan has a massive flaw with Looming Chaos. And I have an asterisk next to this because I have something else to say about it, but I'll talk about the strat itself first. So when Raidplan swaps for Looming Chaos, I want it to be clear. What you see in the Raidplan is not how the swap will happen every time. The way it actually works is the outermost outside platform players, so the MT, H1, and R1 on both sides in this little bottom left diagram, they will swap not with southwest and northeast. They will swap with a random west and east side platform. So if you're the east side furthest player, you can end either southwest or northwest. If you are the westmost other player, you can end either northeast or southeast. That also means that who's being swapped from the inside to the outside is also completely random. So you don't know if southwest is going to get swapped to outside or back inside. You don't know. So what can happen 25% of the time is you end up in a situation where one alliance doesn't have a tank on the inner platforms. Now, that sounds like it's meaningless, but for one of the scariest white moments in the fight, it is incredibly relevant. Because right after Looming Chaos is Towers. Remember how I mentioned that for Towers 1, A's alliance would effectively be split and miss the tank LB? That's because Alliance A has no tanks on the inner platform for the first tower, where you only have tank LB1 anyway, and nothing else has really happened other than Third Art of Darkness at that point. So you're really just playing the game of, do you prefer to have a tank LB1 with everyone in position for first tower, or would you rather have 3 tanks in the middle of the room, tank LB3ing the second set post Looming Chaos, where you're more likely to have had a ton of disasters? And again, I'll asterisk that and get back into it later, because the asterisk I've said for every mechanic is going to be the same asterisk at the end of this. And I think most of you may have figured it out by now. So in case you're wondering why that happens, the tank LB has a range and it's 50 yalms. The arena is 80. So what ends up happening is when you don't have a tank in the middle of the room in order to try and hit everybody, you are damning some people. Again, one strat has it damn you, and if it's the very first tower set, one has it damn you potentially if it's Looming Chaos, post Looming Chaos. So there's a 25% chance of that happening with Raidplan because of the number of different ways it can go. The whole reason why CODCAR's setup is the way that it is for Looming Chaos is to eliminate that problem. There will always be at least, because the Alliance A tanks are going to be sent in, one Alliance B tank will get to stay in, and one Alliance C tank will get to stay in. And that means every alliance has a tank near the center of the room, closer at least, that will probably hit everyone, if not almost everyone, with their tank LB3. There is obviously still a chance, like for example, you could have a double tank tower alignment that's east and west, and that is fairly damning as well. But you're at least creating more scenarios where the tank LB3 is in range of everyone. And that is the chief reason why CODCAR is set up the way that it is. There are some other reasons, like originally we put all the ranged on the outside because we thought they were the only ones that could hit the Atomos. Not true. If you're a ranged DPS inside the tiles, you can help with Atomos. If you're a healer inside the tiles, you can help with Atomos. Don't feel like you're like, oh, outside range, take care of it, outside players. No, you can help. They're not immune to the panel differences. So that's actually not an advantage. Originally, that we made it for that reason. It ends up being an advantage for Bramble, so we translated that over into being an advantage in that regard. But that's it. And then it's just, post Looming Chaos, it becomes what are the pros and cons of each of the towers again. And Third Art of Darkness, and the same pros and cons. The only thing that could potentially go wrong here is not understanding the positioning of the players. So that's, no matter what, you need to know what you're doing post Looming Chaos. I highly recommend, regardless of strat, get into your pairs. At the very least, get into your pairs before you even have to do the first set of towers. just so, like, just visually show everyone that you know where you're supposed to belong. And if something's not right, you have time to fix it before Third Art of Darkness or Towers even happens in the first place. So that's it. Again, advice regardless of which strat you are actually going to do. Whew. So after that, I don't think there's anything to say about chasers. I don't think there's any, like, that's just an executional thing. Do Third Art of Darkness correctly, do chasers correctly, have enough people alive for spread, do wild charge. Like, then it becomes the discussion of all the same mechanics other than the chasers, which the chasers realistically, as long as the chaser doesn't go wild and kill the entire platform because the rotator died, then there's, it's not the end of the world, but you just want to do that correctly. And that pretty much covers it, because at that point, what else is there that you could potentially have assigned to you that you could screw up? Nothing. It becomes about stuff that's individual responsibility, paying attention, cross, donut, the debuffs, the lasers. If you're an outside player, please look at your debuffs. Please constantly monitor your debuffs. Please know when those debuffs expire. Please know that where players should be standing during those. And especially do not aim them towards the inner tile. Please do not do that. Now, I will add a quick addendum. There is a raid plan that has all healers out. That is the same strat, but all the healers are out. It adopts some advantages of CODCAR in a sense that you have a bunch of ranged outside to do the Brambles, for example. So it does address some issues. I have done healer out, and I personally don't like it. There's a number of reasons. One, you're in range of, the healing is not bad. The tanks need to be spot healed occasionally, but honestly, whatever. The other plan, oh my god, I didn't even really mention those. I got so focused on talking about the raid DPS from the B DPS being out in this arrangement. The B DPS being out in this arrangement. I actually totally forgot to mention the whole spot healing, the range that's out there might be one of the silliest things I've heard people. Okay, this is gonna sound very specific to people, but I have had so many controller players ask me, how do I heal people in other alliances quickly? I think people forgot that the game is actually dominated by a lot of controller players. I actually made a video about it. I don't know how many months ago. Like, JP has like, what, an 80% plus adoption rate of controller or something like that? It's some insanely high number for JP. And then obviously in NA, I think it's like just about 50%. I'd have to go back and look. It's like a pretty high percentage, but it's not like everybody. You do not want to rely on the ANC healers needing to spot heal the ranged that are there. Like, if they are a keyboard and mouse player, it's not the biggest deal, but it kind of sucks. Our day one strat, which is not what we're using obviously anymore, we actually made the strat change because our healers talked about spot healing both pre and post Looming Chaos. That was before we understood how Looming Chaos actually baited players. So it was a bit of just a mad dash to try and make it work and actually, like, successfully make it through the phase. So we can't really fault that too much, but that was like the number one problem that we tried to fix, was the healers having to spot heal people and not be in range. And we subsequently ended up with something that our raid lead, who did all of this, after he basically took all the feedback from the individual players of what the problems were, addressed them, and ended up with what CODCAR basically is now. So that was something I kind of glossed over because the discussion there is almost always just spot heal them. Like, it's not even considered when you're talking about the raid plan pros and cons, right? But it is something that we very specifically tried to alleviate and is not alleviated here. And I don't think is something you should be opting into as like the go-to strat. It's just not good. Now, overall, I actually think both strats are pretty close to each other. Like I said, there are some things I have a hard time being objective about, but the bottom line is, while there are problems, executing exactly as shown, it doesn't matter if those problems are there. There is a way to address a problem in Raidplan, and there are ways to address the problems in CODCAR down to the individual player. And that's where the chief message actually comes in here. It's not the strat why you can't clear. If you're struggling in PF, It has nothing to do with which strat you are doing. They both have clear pros and cons. They both have things that can work, and you can prefer one or the other. The problem is all of these strats are contingent on 24 people doing them correctly. That is the entire phase of phase 2 of Cloud of Darkness. The entire phase is designed to have 12 people on the outside doing everything correctly and 12 people on the inside doing everything correctly. As soon as any mistake occurs, every individual player needs to understand how to fix it. If a player on the inside, let's say a player northwest, dies and they get put on the east platform, you need to have one of several solutions to fix it. One is the northeast DPS moving over to northwest in whatever spare time they have, and the northeast DPS taking a portal in. The other is that DPS running all the way around and portaling back in somewhere so that they can re-enter northwest. Just somewhere that's safe enough that they can get onto the platform without killing people, and then also make their way northwest. As long as the individual players know what the fixes are, it's doable. But there is no way to completely mitigate multiple people failing certain things and thus causing more failures to occur. The Looming Chaos swaps mean nothing the moment a single player is dead in either strat, because then players might get picked up and put back down in the exact same spot. You could have 4 people in a corner and then one of them needs to move over. You could have 13 people outside and 11 people inside. And then you need to know exactly who the person, like one person needs to know that they're going in. There's a tank dies and autos start going wild and then an auto kill. Like, it doesn't matter if there's pros and cons to each of them. The entire phase is literally on a knife's edge that if everyone doesn't agree and do the thing, it doesn't matter what you do. Now that comes actually to a final con for CODCAR and technically for both strats altogether, in that we have a really bad problem here in NA of not agreeing on what to do. And then people fight about which one to do. And people prefer one or the other. And then you end up with PFs that do 2 different things. And then you need to know 2 different things, which really isn't that big of a problem for people who have played the game a lot, but then becomes an issue. So this is actually a final con to CODCAR specifically, more than Raidplan. CODCAR changed too many times. Basically, people learned a way it worked, and then, let's change this because it makes more sense, right? NA has been doing this, again, for years and years and years, but what ends up happening is the first thing that's done kind of just rolls. And when people try to improve it, while it is technically better, and players who play the game enough understand that it's better in some capacity, it's also changed. And most people don't actually try to learn how to play Final Fantasy XIV in PF. They just learn to clear said fight, or they try to learn to clear said fight. So as soon as they have something that works and they understand 23 other people understand that it works, all they care about is that exact thing being repeated. That itself has problems. Again, if anything goes wrong, those players are the least reliable to recover a strategy, and thus they become a hindrance because they only understand what they're supposed to do if everything goes right. It's one of those weird, you literally can't win situations. Now, and I don't mean the fight, I mean in existence. Because there's so much individual responsibility upon addressing a mistake from any other player. And to me, this then boils down to this phase and its design not being what I think they wanted it to be. When they initially unveiled Cloud of Darkness Chaotic, they said the difficulty Chaotic is aimed for is extreme. Now, extreme has body checks and mistakes that feel nigh unfixable. That's not an abnormal thing, but they're between 8 people. They also said that Cloud of Darkness, they kind of went too far, and it's more like a savage fight, like a 1st or 2nd savage tier. And I would say that's fairly accurate. But the phase, by design, is hardly recoverable. And there are things they could have done to have improved that. One little thing I don't know if many of you notice, there is actually a small lip on the inside of the east and west platforms. The reason for that is not to save you from walking off. It does if you try to go too far in. And then, of course, that's created a whole bunch of clips online of like people using gap closers and like weird tech to get in between the platforms. But it's very specifically because the elevation between the outside and the inside is actually different. So if you didn't have that lip, you could actually walk off that platform back onto the tiles. And in my opinion, that's what they should have allowed to happen. Instead of the portal, which takes 4 seconds to run over to, 6 seconds to lock in. It's one of 4 random directions, either in front of you, behind you, left, or right. And then 2 seconds to teleport. It's like it takes 15 to 20 seconds to fix an issue where a mechanic is happening every 10 to 15 seconds. So the recoverability is just nigh existent. So I actually think that regardless of strat, they probably just misdesigned the entire phase, and we have to have these discussions about recoverability or where we place people. Like, yeah, you could argue about the splits being weird, about like needing to spot heal. Like, all of those are individual problems with individual strats, and they all have a pro and a con, as I've been talking about in this video. But it is a fundamentally flawed design phase for this number of people. It's something that would work with 8 and does not translate well to 24. What I personally think will happen is that we will never see a phase that is of this difficulty and chaotic. By their own admission, the fight's harder than it is by design meant to be. Like, they've already admitted that before it even released, that it was too hard. It was harder than the vision originally was. So while that's fun now and it's fun for people like me, it isn't a healthy design against what their goal actually is. I think phase 1 and 3 is close to being what I think most people could expect. And that phase is literally chaotic. People with the hand debuffs knowing which one they get, tracking the debuff, the boss is doing an attack, there's lasers. It actually is chaotic and punishing and mildly difficult, but still approachable for most people. The entering with 12 people thing can almost basically get you through to practice phase 1, which by extension, you practice basically half the fight by practicing phase 1, because you just have to be able to do one of 2 patterns and it repeats at the end. So there's I think that at the end of the day, regardless of which strat you do, the recoverability is so dependent on every individual that it doesn't matter. You can do either strat. If everyone just pulls up a cheat sheet on like the right hand side, checks their spot, remembers it, and then make some sort of body language effort to showcase that they know it, both at the start of the fight as a check. People have been doing that in PF, or actually when you get to the phase, like getting into the position so everyone can see what they're supposed to be doing, and you can make adjustments if needed. It's hard to fix. That's it. It's just a hard to fix phase. So that's the real problem with your PFs. Is anyone dying means all of these strats mean nothing. They all literally mean 0 if people die. And it becomes a mad rush to make sure you have rezzers constantly rezzing people. And just, you want to zombie practically past Looming Chaos. Like, once you get past towers and Looming Chaos, all you're hoping for is to zombie enough people to get back to phase 1 and finish the fight. I don't know, I've had a few runs where that isn't what happens, and it's like pretty clean the whole way, and that's nice, but that is literally like less than 1 in 20 runs that actually get past Looming Chaos go that way. And it's crazy how much people are fighting about one over the other, and a lot of people not even understanding what the pros and cons of each are, which is why I made this video. So I don't even know how to end the video because I just keep making the same point over. So I think you understand my point. You now have the pros and cons for both of the strategies that are there. You understand what the flaws are of the fight as a whole, and good luck, because while Raidplan and CODCAR are coexisting now, and there's groups killing with both, and I know that for a fact, that they're both wiping and beating the fight with both, eventually this fight will not be in the party finder nearly as much. It will largely be run by discords, I imagine. And you know what strat the main Discord is using right now. Yeah. Not to say that another Discord won't pop up, but it's something worth considering. I'm just saying. You know? Anyway, I figured this would be a fun way to start 2025. With fire! Ivy is here for the fire. And it's not even the last video I have about this. I have one more, a shorter one, but one more. So I'll upload this as is. Hopefully everyone in the chat had a fun time watching me lose my mind over everything, because I have been recording this live the entire time. And I hope everyone in the comment section has a fun time eating each other alive, like I know you will, because that's all that's been happening with it. It's been, you know what? The comment section, I'm willing to bet, will get a little chaotic. All my comment sections on this have been chaotic, so, you know. Anyway, thanks for watching. Happy New Year. Bye-bye. All right. That was fun. Sly would be proud. You will be dealt with. I like every time somebody says that in Discord, everybody does DELT. Nice and thanks. No, I didn't get distracted. The whole idea is that healers out doesn't actually help with recovery. And so I went to the healers out and then immediately went to the fact that healers out is trying to give you more recoverability, but recoverability is entirely dependent on the individual. It doesn't actually help anything, because the whole point is to put the reses on the outside, so if people die on the inside, they can go back inside, and there's always a reser to make that solution possible, but it requires people to be able to get back on the I'll include this last little bit in the video. Why not? The Happy New Year thing. We can end a little bit after that, just so I have the little asterisk right here. Yeah, no, it effectively doesn't fix anything. And then the tank healing is slightly more annoying. That's really it. It makes recovering more uniform without players understanding how to even recover in the first place. So it doesn't actually end up helping in any capacity, unfortunately. So, sorry.